You're listening to
Catholic Sprouts,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith. Hey there, Sprouts. Today is Wednesday, September 12th, 2018. It is also the feast of St. John Chrysostom. This week on the Catholic Sprouts podcast, we have been talking about suffering. The first day, we talked about why bad things happen. And although we don't have all of the answers to this question, we do know that God can come into any situation and use the suffering in that situation for His greater glory. Next, we talked about what we should do when we suffer and how we should resist turning in on ourselves and instead turn to God and turn to others. Today, we are going to take a lesson from the early Christians. Now, St. John Chrysostom lived a long time ago when the church was just starting out. In fact, he was instrumental in defining some of our most core beliefs as Catholics. Even before him, though, early Christians lived and practiced their faith, but they lived and practiced it much differently than we do today. You see, at the time, most people weren't Christian, and if they found out that you were Christian, you were often persecuted and even killed in horrible ways. In Rome, which became sort of the center of the early church, Christians were persecuted in terrible ways. They were killed by lions in the Colosseum or by gladiators for sport. It was a horrible time of persecution for the early Christians, and yet they continued to practice their faith no matter what might happen to them. What's even more remarkable, maybe, though, is that even amid all of the suffering that the early Christians endured, they remained joyful. The story of St. Cecilia, whose feast day is in November, really shows us how joyful they were. St. Cecilia was an early Christian in Rome. She buried many friends and family members in the catacombs beneath Rome before she finally was sentenced to death. And what did St. Cecilia do? She sang the moment before she was meant to be executed. Through her death, which was prolonged by God, many people came to know and love Jesus and really embrace this joy even amid the worst suffering. And so why could St. Cecilia, even after the death of so many friends and family members, and even facing her own death, how could she sing for joy amid all of this terrible suffering? Well, the lesson is something that we can still learn from today. St. Cecilia knew that she was not made for this world, and neither are you. We actually aren't made for this world. We are made for the next world. We are made for heaven. For this reason, no matter what we do or what we try, this life will always be plagued with suffering. Things will always be uncomfortable or lonely or sad or painful. That's just the nature of this world. We have a deep, deep longing inside of us for the next world, for heaven. And therefore, sometimes we feel the suffering of this world even more profoundly. And yet, we need to cling to the joy that St. Cecilia did. That death is suffering and painful, but we are made for the next world to come. And so, Sprouts, I have a challenge for you today, and it might be a hard one. We've been talking a lot about suffering, and we all agreed that everyone has at least a little bit of suffering in their lives. But here's my challenge for you. Today, I want you to make a point of not complaining. No matter what happens, no matter how small your portion might be, or if you have to go last, or if you fall down and get a little bump, I want you to really, really try not to complain, and instead accept the suffering in front of you with joy and know that you aren't made for this world. You are made for heaven. That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God intended you to be. Just one more thing, Sprouts. If you would like to continue to learn about your amazing Catholic faith at home or in school, I encourage you to download and use a set of free Catholic coloring pages. There's one for each letter of the alphabet, and you'll find them at DoSmallThingsWithLove /coloring.